Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Flashpoint podcast. I'm your host, Cherri Gregg. We're walking you through the flames. This week, the debate focuses on modern-day slavery. Pennsylvania ranked 7th in the country with a number of reports of human trafficking.
This is actually the second largest profitable business in the United States.
Who traffickers target and why, and where they hide in plain sight.
I'm never going to say that's my pimp. It'll be my boyfriend, my daddy.
Are people coming in at odd hours during the night? All of that would be a red flag.
We're arming you with the tools this Human Trafficking Awareness Month. She's a Navy vet who's performing free sex change surgeries for transgender soldiers.
Regardless of what ban he puts in, there's going to be transgender people in the military.
A local doctor weighs in on the Trump administration's transgender military ban. We'll be right back. Flashpoint is sponsored by the Gift of Life Donor Program. Organ donors save lives. Register today at donorsone.org. Welcome back to the Flashpoint podcast. I'm Cherri Gregg. The focus is human trafficking. Modern-day slavery is big business and is happening out in the open.
In banks and bus stations, online and off.
That's from a report by Polaris, a nonprofit that works to stomp out human trafficking. Its 2017 report identified 25 types of human trafficking in the U.S., from massage parlors to domestic cleaning services to escort services. Since 2007, the National Human Trafficking Hotline received nearly 35,000 reports of sex trafficking, with Pennsylvania ranking 7th when it comes to reports for the year 2017. So what are the red flags and what can we do to help those in bondage get free? With me in the studio to discuss this Flashpoint is Stephanie Shantz-Stiver. She's a human trafficking advocate for the Network of Victim Assistance, or NOVA, a group that supports victims of sexual assault in Bucks County. We also have Hugh Organ. He is the Associate Executive Director at Covenant House. And finally, we have Pearl Kim, a former Assistant District Attorney in Delaware County, who prosecuted the first trafficker in Pennsylvania. Everyone, welcome to Flashpoint.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, Stephanie, I want to start with you. Could you please give us a definition of human trafficking?
Human trafficking is the exploitation of someone, whether it's through forced labor or sexual acts, where there has to be that fraud, force, or coercion involved in it. So we're going to see our labor trafficking, we're going to see our sex trafficking, and we're going to see our commercial sexual exploitation of children.
And people have kind of called it like a new neo-slavery type
Yeah,
of thing.
it's modern-day slavery. Yep.
Yeah. And so, Hugh, you work at Covenant House, an organization that specifically works with homeless youth. How prevalent is trafficking among young people, and why are they targeted?
Yeah, well, traffickers prey on your most vulnerable populations. So the average age of entry in the United States is 13 years of age. So you think about that. That's when a kid enters puberty, and a kid's vulnerable, low self-esteem, fighting at home, not getting along with their parents, things like that. That's an easy target for a trafficker, or a kid who's in the child welfare system. Doesn't have the support of a family, easy mark for a child trafficker. So, again, they're going to prey on your most vulnerable. One of the things that we've done was a study with the University of Penn, and one of the things we found out, working with runaway and homeless youth, is that about 20% of the kids are traffic victims.
20%
of the runaway and homeless youth.
1 in 5.
Out of home, yep.
So who is a trafficker? Like, Pearl, I'm thinking about this. Who does this?
So I think what people have to understand when you're looking at trafficking networks, it can look very different. So, for example, there's a unique domestic sex trafficking culture, which would be different from, say, an illicit massage parlor where trafficking might be happening and you might have victims from China. So I think it really depends on what type of network you're looking at. The cases that I prosecuted were primarily domestic sex trafficking, and they had a very unique pimp culture, so to speak. And so when I've done presentations, I've shown actually a piece of evidence where I seized a notebook, and on one page was what was referred to as the pimp rules. And the first line of it was, "Daddy is the law." Number 2, "Never tell daddy no. Do as you're told and do not ask questions." And so, again, it kind of depends on what type of a network you're looking at.
I'm shocked to hear this. And Hugh kind of touched upon this, Stephanie, about young people being victims. So who falls prey to this?
You're going to see the runaway homeless youth. You're going to see ones that are involved in the foster care system. Those are the most vulnerable in regarding children, or even ones that have the past sex abuse history. When we're looking at adults, we're seeing people that have issues with substance abuse. That is the biggest thing with the opioid epidemic that's going on now, as well as mental health. And, when we're looking at the labor trafficking, we are seeing more of international people who are part of the labor trafficking because they're coming in from other countries, being promised these jobs, and that's not the case of what's happening. They're working these long, strenuous hours with little to no pay.
And so give us an example, because I don't think that most people are like, oh, human trafficking. They think it's overseas somewhere, that it couldn't possibly be happening in America. Give me a real world example of this happening. I mean, I've heard it in hotels and stuff. It just seems so unbelievable.
When it comes to trafficking in our area, it could occur in hotel rooms, on street corners, you name it. The internet is a huge place for trafficking as well. So as far as what it looks like at times, I give you a case where we work with a young lady who was not from Philadelphia but was here visiting, got in a fight with her grandparents, ended out on the boulevard. This trafficker who she met via online, and he promised he'd take care of her, bring her to his house and everything else. He took her to a house up in northeast Philadelphia. She was held in the house. She was drugged and held there for over 2 weeks while men came into this house and repeatedly had sex with her. She was sexually assaulted again and again and again while this guy is collecting money. And this kid is 16 years old. That's what human trafficking at times looks like. It could also look like a family member. Oftentimes we see that the family member was the first person to traffic a kid. I've had kids tell me their uncle, brought them to the United States, promised them a better job, and we're going to be able to send money home and take care of their family. And this kid was trafficked here by her uncle, again, above a hair braiding shop in Southwest Philadelphia. She was forced to provide sex to men who were brought into the shop in the evening, and then during the day she was forced to sit in the shop and braid hair all day long. Again, it could look different depending on the situation.
How do they even find this situation, and is this a priority for law enforcement?
Well, it certainly should be. I think part of the problem is just limited funding and resources to prosecute these cases. There was a new legislation that was passed that gives the Attorney General now concurrent jurisdiction, and I do think that will help efforts. When I was at Delaware County and you're working within just the county office, you do have some legal complexities when you have cases that are starting to go into different counties or different states. And so I think this really—
people take folks
correct,
across lines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can't predict where an investigation is necessarily going to take you. So I think it's really important that everyone works together in all phases of law enforcement, being local, state, and federal. And in addition to that, I think the community they're the most important piece, because that's where we can get our tips. And since you mentioned that, can I give you the National Human Trafficking Hotline number?
Sure. And we'll get that at the end again, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's 1-888-373-7888. And so if anyone, as we say, if you see something, say something, please call that hotline number, and it gets funneled back to local law enforcement.
Yeah, so people are looking. But Stephanie, can we talk about the victims here? Mm-hmm. Because why not, Hugh's telling us a story about, a young woman brought here, working in a braiding shop, getting abused, raped, basically every single day. Why not just walk out or call 911 or get some help?
And that's always the biggest thing people ask is, why aren't they just leaving, screaming, calling out for help? But, when many times they're threatened. They're threatened not to talk to anyone, or they may kill their family members or do something worse to them or their family members. You also have it where when they are groomed to essentially either love this person, almost like a boyfriend or girlfriend, and they build that relationship of trust where they only focus on that trafficker. So they have now pushed that person away from all their family and everyone else. So when they get them in the trafficking, they are essentially groomed and, if you want to say brainwashed, not to talk to law enforcement, not to talk to anyone. They only trust that. And many of the times they still love that person and that they're doing it for that person. They don't always recognize what's happening to them is wrong. And the trafficking part of it, they don't see themselves as victims. So unfortunately, that's why they're not running away or they're not calling out for help, because they're either brainwashed or they truly care about that person.
And so when they come to you, Hugh, you get them at Covenant House and they've been brainwashed and traumatized. What are you getting there?
Yeah, well, one of the things we do is we meet the kids where they are. So one of the things we really start to do is build trust. So when a young person comes to us, the first thing we do is we feed them, to be honest. That's the first thing we do. Because for a lot of these kids, they haven't had their meals on a regular basis because the trafficker controls all that. Everything from when you eat, sleep, to go to the bathroom is all controlled by your trafficker. So when kids first come in, we start to feed them. They may need a shower. We had one kid who came off the street, and the first 24 hours, she slept. She slept for 24 hours straight, and when she woke up, she ate. So one of the things we do is we start to meet kids where they are, basic needs first. And then the other thing we start to do is start to empower these kids with little decisions, like even from a choice about what you get to eat. Because, again, traffickers have made these decisions for them. So giving them choices about what they could eat or what they could be drinking, what they would like to be called, because the trafficker has assigned them a name. And maybe that's the name they came in with, but that's not necessarily the name they want to be called. So you start to empower these kids, and then they start to trust and build trust because they've been burned by every adult who's pretty much entered their lives. So you have to start with building the trust and start to empower them so that you can start to build trust and they can start to open up about what may have happened.
And when you hear this, Pearl, does it make it tough for you? You have like Stephanie said, you have a victim who's been brainwashed,
Absolutely.
Who's been told that they can't make any decisions and basic necessities been taken. How are you as a prosecutor, law enforcement, how are you able to even help these folks be able to help you put the trafficker behind bars?
I think that's what makes prosecution so difficult. As mentioned before, a lot of these victims don't self-identify as victims. They don't necessarily want your help. And so it's really a process. I think the most important part is making sure that you've trained law enforcement officials, that you're working with women against rape advocates or some other social service that understands how to work with these victims properly. And it has to be a collaborative effort.
What are the major challenges you see, Stephanie? And everybody kind of jump in here because there are major challenges if you're talking about, victims who are brainwashed, who love their abuser, who are young. Maybe their family member is disconnected. And then you have people who are untrained. Folks don't know. Right. There seems to be a lot of challenges to trying to identify and then prosecute this.
Absolutely. The biggest thing is building that trust with that person. And that can take a long time. There needs to be a lot of patience with that because they've been brainwashed not to have them trust anyone. That's, I think, for me, as working directly with victims, is building that trust with them. And that can take a long time.
And how do you do that?
Always reassuring them that I am there for them because they haven't had people that have been there for them and, or broken promises. So staying with them and reassuring and not taking back. Obviously, I never promise them anything because I don't want to break a promise that they've been broken so many times. But following through with them consistently, proving yourself that you are truly there for them. That takes a lot of time to do that. And once you can build that trust is when then you can start helping them rebuild their lives, getting them the resources that they need, making appropriate referrals, getting them the medical attention that they need.
It seems like it could take many, many years to heal from some trauma like this.
Some of them, they're going to endure a lifetime. You can have as much trauma therapy that you want, but this is something that's going to be a part of them for the rest of their life.
Yeah. And so how do we identify it? Because one of my brothers is a truck driver, right? And so he does long distance driving, and he heard about this, and so he's constantly at the stops always looking. And so where do people look? What do you do? How do you know?
Mm-hmm. Looking for what the signs are. Like you're talking about a kid who runs away. Kid who runs away more than one time, 3 times, 4 times. Kids who got multiple runs away. Kids who stay away from home more than 30 days at a time. Those are red flags for trafficking. Kids who have a boyfriend who's 10 plus years older than them, red flag for possible trafficking. Where the identification documents are being held by somebody else. And you're really talking about a controlling, abusive relationship. So the trafficker is going to try and control all interactions. What is said, if there's questions that need to be answered, the trafficker is going to try and answer those questions. So you have to look for that type of thing going on. For truckers, for example, truck stops, street corners. Mm-hmm. There are areas of this city where there are young ladies and young men and some of our trans kids out there every single day of the week on street corners. So a part of it for me is reaching out to those kids and find out what's going on and what they may need. The other red flags we look for, believe it or not, is tattoos. It's a common tactic used by traffickers to tattoo their victims. Pimp in Philadelphia tattooed all the girls with his name. One girl had it on her finger, one had it on her neck, but every girl that worked for him had a tattoo with his name on it. And again, it's about dehumanizing them. They're a piece of property. So again, like we train social workers to ask, always on an intake form, do you have any distinguishing marks or tattoos? Ask what the tattoo means. because then you may get a whole other conversation. Because it may say, oh, that's my boyfriend. And again, they're never going to say, that's my pimp. It'll be my boyfriend, my daddy. It's not going to say, oh, yeah, that's my pimp or my trafficker. So you have to also know what the kids' conversation, so the lingo they use, because they're never going to come out and say, hey, I'm a victim of human trafficking. That's my trafficker's name tattooed on my neck.
And do they even use that language, human trafficking,
No.
the victims?
No.
They don't use that.
No.
When I hear all of this, I mean, all of this is happening, and then you try to prosecute these cases. You try to arrest these folks. Every once in a while, you hear a big splash.
Sure.
But I've seen a lot of people prosecute women who are sex workers or viewed as sex workers, and no one really goes beyond that and then find out later that they're trafficked. Is there a disconnect in assigning blame when you talk about these trafficking networks?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that that's a tremendous challenge because prostitution is illegal in Pennsylvania, right? And so, again, to me, it has a lot to do with education and awareness, making sure that detectives, prosecutors are able to identify the warning signs if the victim, for example, is not going to self-identify as a victim. And something that I also want to mention that we haven't brought up that I think is also important is with a lot of these networks, the challenge is also understanding almost a level of cultural competency or language access could be another issue as well. And so when you're
explain that issue.
So, for example, if you're looking at an illicit massage parlor or an Asian massage parlor sometimes is referred to as, I mean, you got to look at different warning signs. You're not necessarily going to be looking at tattoos per se, but you're going to be looking at whether you think that this is a legitimate massage parlor. Are they working normal hours? Are people coming in at odd hours during the night? All of that would be a red flag that something else might be going on. And what we tend to find in a lot of these brothels, so to speak, would be individuals from other countries. And again, so that there are language barriers that exist there in terms of trying to work with individuals in determining whether they are a victim or not. And so it presents a lot of challenges for law enforcement.
Okay, so there's a lot of money involved here.
Yes.
Because I feel like I don't want to skip over the financial advantage. This is why everybody doing this for money.
This is actually the second largest profitable business in the United States.
And could you go into detail? Because I didn't know. I mean, a lot of folks, you living your little happy life or whatever. You're dealing with your own daily struggles. You don't realize that this is billions being made doing this.
So I know when we calculated one time what one victim could make a year, and it was about like $330,000 a year, and that's for one victim. And if you think about the number of victims there are in the United States, it comes out to a very large amount. So, I mean, these women are seen as property. They are moneymakers. And I don't want to say just women because there are children and there are men as well. But it is a very large moneymaker.
Somebody obviously is paying. Mm-hmm. Are they being prosecuted?
They are being prosecuted, probably not to the extent we'd like to see. One of the things that's actually in the law right now in Pennsylvania, they're trying to enact what's called the Buyers Beware Act, which would increase penalties for individuals who are purchasing these young ladies and these young men on the street corners. And it will also increase the degree of the charge as well. Again, this is about risk and reward. Like you said, if there's no risk in doing this behavior, I'm not going to go to jail. I'm only going to if I get caught, I get a slap on the wrist or a $500 fine. That's not a whole lot of risk involved there. So again, until it becomes such that the risk is not worth it, people are going to continue to do this. And part of it is changing our laws.
Yeah, and I'm shocked, because I don't think most people realize that all of this is going on right in their own neighborhood, communities, at the massage parlor, at the corner. Mm-hmm. They had no idea.
Law enforcement, and we have all these great advocacy groups that are really trying to get out there. We've seen a lot of support from churches, Rotary clubs, individuals bringing us in. I think it's important to note that I'm sure each and every one of us here would be willing to do a presentation to continue our efforts in educating individuals.
Now, one of the Super Bowl is coming up. I did a big story on this a couple years ago. I remember I think the NFL draft was coming. And, anytime there's big sporting events, people are on high alert. And explain why these big sporting events, everybody's going to be watching the Super Bowl, but then there's a whole underground world going on.
It's a large event. These are a large number of crowds that are coming in. So these traffickers know I'm going to bring my girls, my men, or whoever to these events. And, these are people, especially the Super Bowl. It's not cheap to get to the Super Bowl. I mean, these tickets are expensive. So these are people who are going to have some money. So they're going to take it to where the money is and we'll get those sales because these people have money.
And they're looking to have a good time, whatever.
Exactly.
And they're paying cash and all this. And so people traffic and they bring them across state lines and county lines and all that kind of stuff. So what can the average person do? Because, more and more people we get the long list of missing persons every day. We get emails from the police department saying, 14-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, whoever, and we get a picture. And a lot of these folks are the ones who could very likely be the targets.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A big part of what I tell people all the time is let's not wait for these kids to get trafficked. One of the things we found when we did this study with kids who had been trafficked, one of the things that was preventing kids from being trafficked was a positive adult role model who was engaged in this kid's life and completing school, graduating high school. Those were the two factors that helped prevent possible trafficking. So I tell people all the time, don't wait for kids to be out on the street corners. Be a coach, be a mentor now. And, Philadelphia, I grew up here in Southwest, and we're a city of neighborhoods. And there's always that person on the block who knows what's going on with everybody's business. A part of it for me is knowing that kid who's struggling. Everybody knows a kid on their block who's struggling, who might be going down the wrong path, and maybe their parents aren't paying attention because of drugs or mental health or whatever. That's the kid we need to get to know. That's the kid we need to make sure is getting the services so that kid is not vulnerable when the trafficker comes a-calling, because they will come a-calling. And a part of it for me is that's how people can get involved before these kids get trafficked. Afterwards, you call the hotline, like Pearl said. You can post the hotline. Human Trafficking Hotline has a website, rescueandrestore.com. You can download brochures. They're free. They're in multiple languages. Post them up in your area of business, in your office if you're a counselor, and put it out there so people know it's safe to talk about the stuff and how they can get help. And the other thing for me is legislative advocacy. We need to change the laws. Our laws need to get tougher, and we've been moving in the right direction in Pennsylvania. We still got a ways to go. We still have quite a ways to go.
And the good news is there's task force, it seems like, in every county now. Sure. So the awareness is becoming more and more and more, and starting with law enforcement and beyond, and people working together.
But absolutely. But I agree. I think public awareness and public buy-in is also very critical, because with that, they can contact their legislators. They can get on their radar. They can contact their local district attorney, which, again, hopefully there'll be some sort of recognition that, we do need to have resources. We do need to have funding allocated specifically to combat these crimes.
Yeah, and should people be talking to kids, especially more vulnerable kids? Should we be talking to all kids? Kids have access to information and points of view that we don't.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a big thing is with parents is talking about the internet safety. So one thing that I do in Bucks County is I get referrals from children and youth when there might be a concern that a child could potentially become a victim. And I do a whole screening process. And, I've found that majority of the kids that I'm dealing with, the sites and the apps that they're using, that these parents need to start monitoring what they're going on, checking their phones, checking their iPads, their accounts, and all of that, because that's where these traffickers are finding them. They're finding them in these chat rooms, even in the game. Some of these gaming systems have chat room capabilities. They'll post as a child, and they get to know you. They'll find your Facebook. They'll see who you're friends with. And, they reach out to those friends. So, it's the internet safety is such a big key factor with the youth today.
Yeah. If I can just add to that, I think it's also important. I know some high schools don't like to talk about domestic violence and sexual violence in high schools, but I think it's really critical that these young folks understand what an unhealthy relationship looks like in order to prevent that in the future. Because you see a lot of these vulnerable youth, as we mentioned before, it's a distorted version of love to their pimp, and it's unhealthy. But, if we can show them the warning signs in advance, hopefully we can prevent some of this.
And they're not supposed to, that's not love to tell you can't use the bathroom type of thing.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so let's talk about resources, because, January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And I want folks to know if they're in whatever county, wherever they are, tell them, your website, and if you have a number you want to share, please let us know right now, and we'll keep that in. Yeah.
Again, I think the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which I will repeat, which is 1-888-373-7888.
Wonderful. Please call if you see something. Yeah.
Locally, Philadelphia, get involved with your coalition as well. We run the Philadelphia Anti-Trafficking Coalition. Our website is www.patcoalition.org, and as well as with Covenant House, www.covenanthousepa.org. And there are a lot of agencies doing a lot of good work, and they also need support. So, financial support is always appreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in Bucks County, we have the Bucks County Coalition Against Trafficking. Many of the counties have the same kind of local coalitions where anyone can join, where we have subcommittees of looking at victim focus, looking at law enforcement prosecutors, the legislative part of it. Ours is at Nova, is www.novabucks.org. We have a 24-hour hotline as well, 215-343-6543, and definitely the national hotline number.
Over the past few years, I've seen an uptick in awareness and just coalitions and task force all over our area, and I'm very happy to see that. Thank you so much to Stephanie Shantz-Stiver. Thank you so much to Hugh Organ, and thank you to Pearl Kim for coming on Flashpoint and talking about this issue in the news.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Next up, she's a Navy vet helping transgender soldiers.
Yeah, it's a huge betrayal.
Why a Bucks County activist says transgender troops are here to stay despite the military ban. We'll be right back. Hey guys, listen up. When you're done with the show, would you do me a favor? Please provide a review and rate this podcast. And feel free to provide feedback often. We need reviews to push us to the top. Now back to the show. Thanks all. This is Flashpoint, where we talk about the issues that get everyone hot and bothered. I'm your host, Cherri Gregg, and one thing that gets Philadelphia residents hot under the collar is attacks against our men and women in uniform. This week, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed President Donald Trump's transgender military ban to go into effect, while litigation over its legality continues in the lower courts. The Pentagon has said nothing will change for the estimated 12,000 transgender troops who are now. Dr. Christine McGinn has made headlines. A transgender woman, she is a Navy veteran and Bucks County-based surgeon who performs gender reassignment surgeries. Her clients include active duty soldiers. Dr. McGinn, welcome to Flashpoint.
Thank you.
So just your reaction to the U.S. Supreme Court decision that allows the transgender ban to move forward.
Certainly, it's sad. It's a sad statement for the message it sends. Whether or not it will have an effect, we'll have to wait and see. There's a lot that's unknown about how this is going to be implemented. Just as many of these tweets and policies filter through to action. Initially shocked and saddened, and then when you think about it more, I look at the past 2 years after his initial tweet, it really hasn't had much of an effect in reality. I think that the trans issue is really a canary in the coal mine for things to come, of how his administration can take things that are factless, solely based on non-fact issues, and turn it into policy.
Yeah, and it's a couple years ago when the President Donald Trump sent that initial tweet, you made an announcement supporting transgender men and women serving in the military. And what was that announcement?
Since 2017, I believe, we've been doing surgery pro bono on transgender active duty members in an effort to show the military that it's really not as expensive or a problem for deployment as Donald Trump is stating. To back up, their reasoning was that, if they started paying for transgender care, that it would debilitate the military and use so much money, and people wouldn't be ready. But really, this is a healthcare issue. We take care of our military members. That's the way the military works, and this is an evidence-based, medically necessary therapy and procedure for people. I can't think of one medical association, legitimate medical association, that doesn't agree that it's legitimate, medically necessary. To take it one step further, we've proven this in my practice. Since we made this offer, we've had 14 people come through. So mind you that in between the time he made the statement and as of yesterday, trans military people by policy were able to have surgery. So out of the whole military, which is vast, we've only had 14 surgeries of people who can take us up on the offer. Now, granted,
and it didn't cost what they were saying it was going to cost.
No, in fact, Trump was saying something outrageous about the cost. There was a RAND study. They estimated between $2.4 and $8.4 million a year. And you're looking at the military's entire budget, something like $45 billion, I think. The fact is that even that RAND study, in actuality, it's even 0.1% of the RAND study is what we found.
So you realize that, because, I mean, people were saying it's going to cost all this money to do one gender reassignment surgery, and you doing them for 14 people pro bono, it was a fraction of what they said it was going to cost. Did it cost you a lot of money to do this?
It's not money. It's just lost. I could have had somebody else in that place that was a paying person, but it's what I want to do. You know, I was in the military, I was in the Navy, and I have a sense of camaraderie. And these people that come in and have surgery, they're highly trained individuals, I have people coming in that are helicopter pilots who have, the military has spent, you know, close to $2 million training them, and financially it doesn't make any sense to get rid of somebody who you've spent $2.2 million to train as a class of people. Just get rid of them out of the military. Yeah. And mind you, this was not his initial tweet was to get rid of everybody that was transgender. It was an entire class of people, not just, and that's really scary. Stop and think about that.
Yeah.
You know, it not even the ones that are seeking to have surgery. For the listeners who aren't familiar with the whole process, not every trans person has or wants surgery. Some have already had surgery, some don't want it. So it's a more complicated subject than, you know, some of the headlines.
Just so people know, I mean, the policy, the ban was in place, but there were injunctions placed on the rollout of the ban by lower courts. And what the U.S. Supreme Court decision basically says is that the ban can go ahead and take place while the lower court litigation continues. So it means that if you're a transgender individual, that you can no longer serve. And a lot of people told the military they were open. Is there a feeling of betrayal here, Dr. McGinn?
Well, of course, yeah. That's obvious, and to dovetail into that, the people who aren't trans, who are running the show in the military, the commanders, they must be thinking, well, you know, are we going to be changing this back again in another 2 years? And why are we getting rid of a significant number of active duty military members that have already been trained only to have to reverse this again in a couple of years because it's not based on fact? I mean, that's what I think is going to happen. So, yeah, it's a huge betrayal. And, you know, when you start drilling down and looking at individual lives, it's a tragedy. I mean, I'll paint a picture for you. So you could have somebody who has been in the military, has served at war, and maybe has been in for, 17 years and is coming up on retirement at 20 years and was told you can come out and we'll take care of you and everything's okay. And then 2 years later was told, oh, you came out, now we're going to kick you out and you won't get all the retirement benefits that you've, put your life on the line for. It doesn't take much to realize how unjust that is. At
this point, I mean, I know people were making other arguments, so Dr. McGinn, and I want you to talk about that because people were talking about, well, psychologically there are issues. There's gender dysmorphia and all of these different things as part of the justification. It wasn't the main justification, but as part of the justification for the ban. What do you say in response to that?
Okay, so I think you're talking about gender dysphoria, which is
gender dysphoria.
Yeah, there's a lot of stereotyping and discrimination going on when you have just the general public. Let me be clear. The medical profession is clear on this, that this is a legitimate medical issue that responds very well to treatment, and there are plenty of medical issues that people in the military have that respond to treatment that allow them to continue to serve. So I think what you're getting at is people are saying that trans people are crazy, and that's certainly not true. So that's an easy answer for you.
Yeah. As someone who served in the Navy, who put their life on the line, and provided service to their country, what does this do to the view of the military for people, whether you're trans or not?
Even if you're not trans, this sends a message about trust. That's the big message here. It's a very broad, simple message about trust, and we have an excellent reputation in the military of taking care of our own, and this is the opposite. And so even if you're not trans, you can see what can possibly happen. What I have noticed are the stories of, the 14 people I've treated so far. And the 14 that we've done, I've spent a lot of time talking to them and how did their command react to all this, and how was it? And uniformly, at the command level, for those listeners that were in the military, you understand the sense of camaraderie. And whether you have a man, a woman, somebody who's transgender, the camaraderie is there. We're there to do a job when we're in the military, no matter what color you are, what sex you are, what gender you display. So as long as, and lives depend on that. So the bond is stronger than the preconceived ideas. And once everyone works together and you have that cohesion, the unit cohesion. So I see that when I talk to these patients, like my command was very supportive. As long as they care more about whether I'm doing my job or not. You have a helicopter pilot and, that person's mission is to protect those that are on the ground. Who cares what uniform they're wearing up in that helicopter? So the commands have been very supportive. These, unfortunately, the transgender members are, a political football, and the strings are being pulled from much higher above. But at the local command, they've been very supportive, and we've been totally successful at getting these people back and deployable within 30 days. That was their other argument, was that they were going to be tied up for years.
And so they would come to you, get the gender reassignment surgery, and then be back up on their feet and working.
Yeah, deployable. Go to war in 30 days. So.
Wow.
So, and I knew that was going to be an issue, and that was a goal of mine. And having military experience, I understand how all that works. We are at 100% of getting our post-op patients back in 30 days.
That is remarkable, because you would think that it would take a lot longer to heal.
They still have to. There's depending on what surgery. That's the other point I'd like to make, is like it's not just one surgery. There's various surgeries, but most of the surgeries performed out of those 14 were vaginoplasties, which is the most difficult surgery. It's totally doable, And when you look at the military, you can have some serious injuries just by training. You could have like knee problems, orthopedic issues that are very serious and take upwards of 6 months to a year to heal. So in the military, at any given time, there's a significant percentage of people who are on the injured list. That can be 6 months to a year. So you can't just single out transgender people. It's the same. It's an equivalency.
Yeah. And how long were you in the military? I know you don't go personal, but how long were you there?
I was active duty for 4 years, but when you go through medical school, it's a little bit more complicated. I wore the uniform for about 10 years. During medical school, you have to do active duty a couple weeks and here and there, so it's complicated. But I'm very familiar with the culture.
Yeah. And so you're still helping transgender soldiers through the gender reassignment process right now?
Correct. Yeah, we have 9 on the books for the next coming months. So, I'll be curious to see what happens. I mean, basically, there's no skin off the military, because they don't have to pay for anything. They just have to allow the member to take the time off to recover. So, I've seen it where it's sanctioned by the command that they have the 30 days off. Also, a lot of times patients have sick leave built up, so they have that time off coming to them, and they can just use that. But I think what's going on here is a step further, just to forbid them.
Yeah.
From even on their own time and on their own dime having this done, even though they may be a successful active duty member. It seems, Donald Trump talks about the art of the deal and how everything's money. Well, this doesn't seem financially smart decision to make.
Yeah, because you're wasting all the training dollars that were spent.
He's pandering to his base, because this does, as you said, get people riled up. It is, a touchy subject, and it's fodder for his base. And he throws this out when things are going bad to sort of change the direction of the news. And so, here we are talking about it.
Yeah, and we are talking about it. And does it mean, because if it says, to someone, it says, okay, you have to serve at the gender of your birth. That means that if you get the gender reassignment surgery, you still can't serve.
Right. So it's not finished going through the courts about how this is going to end up. But my understanding is the way this reads is so those 14 patients that have had surgery and have completed their transition, and their medical records reflect that they are the gender they are expressing, then they can stay in. If there's a transgender person who has not come out yet, they can stay in. Regardless of what ban he puts in, there's going to be transgender people in the military. So let's not boil it down and oversimplify it.
Because they
just like before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there was a lot of gay people in the military. You just didn't know about it. It's not going to change who's there, but it's just going to change their freedom.
People are just going to go underground, sort of like suppress, their identities.
Right. It's a witch hunt, to use his word. Because
it's very likely, like you said, that the courts could, in fact, determine that the ban is unconstitutional, is illegal, and then, the Supreme Court decision is null and void in a sense, and then have to go all the way back up to the courts. So it just seems like we're just in some limbo space.
Well, the scary part of this is that his last two appointments to the Supreme Court, it depends if they're going to look at the facts and the law, or if they're just going to be a puppet for Donald Trump. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and
that has a chilling effect. That has a lasting effect.
Has there been an outpouring of support for the trans community? Have you felt that? Have you seen that?
I'm careful to be sort of middle of the road. I don't want to be outraged, and I take a deep breath. It's certainly not a good thing what happened, but I do still have faith and hope in this country, and I still stand firm that in the end people will do the right thing.
Well, Dr. Christine McGinn, thank you so much for appearing on Flashpoint and talking about this issue in the news, and I wish you luck.
Yeah, and thank you so much for giving this issue a voice. It's important.
Next up, the Free Library celebrates Black History Month.
It's part of America's story.
What you can expect throughout February in Philadelphia. We'll be right back.
It's the smart look at the issues catching fire in Philadelphia. Flashpoint.
What we have is a crisis.
This goes way beyond just the perpetrator.
You know how many times I had stopped people in front of my house from shooting up?
It was a moment where Black and brown people on the margins got to say, no, we've been hurting.
I think we forget that you came from somewhere else, too.
Host Cherri Gregg walks you through the flames. On air Saturday evenings at 9:30 and Sunday mornings at 8:30. Or search the Flashpoint podcast on the radio.com app.
This is Flashpoint, and I'm Cherri Gregg. We here at KYW are all about community. We're heading into a month where we take time to commemorate centuries of contributions by African Americans. Unrestricted by a skewed history, February allows us all to truly reflect on the history we know and the future we dream. That's why the Free Library of Philadelphia is dedicating a series of events to the celebration. Here to tell us more about their effort is Director of Neighborhood Library Enrichment Programming, Kalela Williams. Kalela, welcome to Flashpoint.
Hi, how are you? Thank you.
Yes, and so the Free Library is doing something very special for Black History Month. Tell us about it.
Sure. So we have a series of programs taking place all throughout February, starting at the beginning of February and leading all the way up until the end of February. And there's a couple of special things that are happening this year in 2019. One is One Book, One Philadelphia, which many of you might have heard of before. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a citywide celebration of a single book. It's sort of like a citywide book club. And the book this year, the featured book for 2019 is Sing Unburied Sing by two-time National Book Award winner Jesmyn Ward. Is the story of a young boy who's journeying with his mother to a prison in Mississippi to see his father. And it's a story about race, identity. It's a story about drug abuse. It's a story about violence. And it's also the story about a legacy of prisons and incarceration in Black communities. But it's mostly a story of hope and of family and of faith and of coming together. So those are things that I like to take away when I think about Black History Month. And we've got a lot of events that are framed around One Book, One Philadelphia.
Wonderful. And so I know it's citywide. There's lots of libraries within the Free Library of Philadelphia system. Why is it important for this library to do this thing during this month?
Sure. So Black History Month, of course, is a celebration that is decades old. And it's important because we think of history as something that's past. And of course, we know William Faulkner said history is never past. It's something that lives with us. And Black history, of course, is so important, and it's something that we cherish and that we honor. It's part of America's story. And so a book like Sing Unburied Sing it speaks to really urgent and timely issues that affect African American communities today and that affect America as a whole. You know, when we think of, for instance, the opioid epidemic, that's something that affects our whole country. These are things that are really important to talk about and vital to talk about.
Yeah, and so give us some examples of some of the programs that will be taking place across the city.
Sure. As part of One Book, One Philadelphia, one program that I'm very excited about is called Their Spirit in Everything, and it's sponsored by Monument Lab, and it's taking place at Parkway Central Library. We'll have professors who will be discussing critical writing, living memory, and the idea of the haunts of history within African-descended people. We have some author events that are happening. Feminista Jones and Damaris B. Hill. Yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited about hearing them speak. Brittany Cooper, hearing her speak. Of course, she's the author of a book called Eloquent Rage, which I think is just a great title. And some other programs that are taking place. And I want to also call attention to another series of programs that are happening as part of Black History Month and beyond. And that is that the library recently finished an exhibition on Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois. That is in the West Gallery of the Free Library, which is open to the public whenever the library is open. And we pulled reproductions of images and documents from institutions in the city, including our own library's resources, and from within institutions in the entire country. So there's a very comprehensive exhibition on these two men, these two activists. And this was curated in part by me and also in part by Dr. Judith Giesberg of Villanova University. So we were very excited about that. The design by Nathaniel Roche is phenomenal. It's a beautiful exhibition, and we've got some programs taking place as part of that, too.
Wow, you have me all excited. I want to go over there and check it out. And so this is the main library, of course, on Vine Street that this is taking place, but there's also programming in neighborhood libraries as well.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of great programs that are happening throughout neighborhood libraries that honor women, whether you want to leap like the ballerina Misty Copeland or fly like pilot Bessie Coleman or even go among the stars like Mae Jemison. There's all sorts of programs that are honoring these African-American heroes throughout neighborhood libraries. We've got poetry readings, we've got film screenings, we've got open mic nights, we've got an essay contest. One event that I'm really excited about is taking place at Lucien Blackwell Library, at Blackwell Regional Library. And that is an African-American community institution and resource fair. So we're going to have all sorts of organizations and institutions from throughout the city converging at Blackwell Regional Library in West Philadelphia to provide resources and provide opportunities for engagement and enrichment.
That's amazing. Lots of stuff to do during the month of February to celebrate Black History Month and right here at our own libraries.
Yes, yes.
Wonderful. So where can people go to find information of what's happening in their neighborhood?
Sure. You can go to freelibrary.org/Black History Month.
So I want to say thank you so much to Kalela Williams, Director of Neighborhood Library Enrichment Programming for the Free Library of Philadelphia. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
That's it for the Flashpoint podcast. I hope you enjoyed this exclusive content. Follow us on Twitter. Our handle is Flashpoint Show. You can also follow me at Cherri Gregg. You can subscribe to the Flashpoint podcast for exclusive content using the radio.com app or other platforms. Simply search Flashpoint KYW. If there's an issue that makes you hot under the collar, let us know and we'll walk you through the flames. As President Barack Obama once said, justice grows out of recognition of ourselves and each other, that my liberty depends on you being free too. I'm your host, Cherri Gregg. Until next week, thanks for listening.